Hi, I'm Reggie Turner. I'm here with Terrence Moore and Jim Miller. The FlipSide starts right now. Welcome to the show. Well, we are done with our election coverage for now.
For now,
right, gentlemen? But let's talk about some community issues, some things that have been bubbling to the surface. In the Herald Mail last week, there was an article titled, Downtown Drug Use Threatens the Future of Hagerstown. And just to give a broad recap of that, a local business owner, the president of Wright Gardner Insurance, wrote an email to City Council, also CCing our state delegation on that letter, and he was expressing his disgust in regards to activities downtown around drug usage and crime and things of that nature. And it's pretty alarming when you have a 100-year-old customer of the city of Hagerstown feeling the need not only to send a letter to the elected officials in the city, but also to the Herald Mail. So it seems like he was sounding the alarm. What say you, Jim?
okay, I accept your premise. Here's my question. It seems like no matter what local area you look at, they all have drug problems at this point. We have a drug problem, not just at the city of Hagerstown, but nationwide in communities and municipalities. Is ours worse than others? I don't know. Do I feel like this is not top of mind for our city government officials? I think it is. I think they're perplexed as to how to fix it. And I know we're going to talk about some of the things that they're doing to highlight their efforts, but I would imagine that we're not the only community in that same situation.
I don't believe that we're the only community, but I remember from my Leadership Maryland class, we're kind of like the second worst in the state when it comes to these issues. And I'll have to go back to some of the slides that were presented in one of the sessions we were at, but it was alarming. Terrence, I'm going to tee this up for you. One of the things that he said in his letter is that when he was addressing City Council, and this is Christian Wright, the president of Wright Gardner, he says, when you say Hagerstown is thriving and we are addressing drug problems, let it be known to all those statements are hollow and fascist.
Well, let me kind of take a step back first before addressing that statement. And that statement is purely out of frustration. You can hear it in that statement.
Absolutely.
That's frustration of a business owner. But I think we got to separate drug use and the behaviors that come from the drug use, right? So I think, yes, drug use is rampant across this country, unfortunately. And it has been for decades, right? It has been a problem. And we go back to the 90s or go back to the 70s. There's always been a drug epidemic that has been underlining. But if you go to the 90s, that drug epidemic created crime. It created violence. So it was the actions that came from the drug use that really raised an awareness of cities and states across our country. So I believe this business owner isn't negating that drug use is nationwide, but is more concerned about the behavior of the drug use and what's stemming from that openly in the community, which is causing the frustration and a threat to employees and customers. So as far as thriving being hollow, it's subjective, right? It's subjective. Depends on where you're looking from. If you're not downtown or you're just looking from a business sector, or it depends on what corner of the street you look at, whether or not downtown is thriving or moving towards thriving. So I think, again, that's about frustration. And I say this, and I've said this for years. if you want to be a big populated city, you also have to usher in some policies and controls that comes with some of the changes that may come along with it. And I say that because if there's an issue now, it's possibly can only get worse as this community starts to thrive, bringing in more of a population, bringing in more people downtown. And I'm from New York City. I think a lot of times we blow a lot of the things out of proportion, and maybe I'm desensitized to a certain extent, being in a highly populated city most of my life. But even the thoughts about the crime and the things that we see now, you don't like it when it's on your front lawn, but it is happening nationwide, and it is more concentrated when you bring attention to it and make promises openly and draw attention to it and campaigning about it and speaking about it. And I think for years, the city has done a bad job in doing poor marketing, talking about how dangerous downtown is when I've never had a problem walking downtown, right? We talked about the drug use, and I think by bringing it up and bringing it to the forefront in political campaigns and marketing campaigns to bring attention to it, you've raised a greater awareness to it of the people of the constituents in this area. So I think it's going to be hard without having those conversations, because people want action and they want it now. And it's hard to, like you said, one way talking about how great downtown is and what we're doing, and Hagerstown is so amazing, and then turn around and see what you see on the streets every single day. And I don't know what the answer is, but it's definitely an issue.
Well, I'm from a rural community, so your vantage point is different. And I would say you probably are desensitized because you're from New York City. Coming from a rural community, it's kind of alarming, some of the things that you see. Now, do I personally feel in danger? No, I don't. But I will be mindful of where I take my family. And when you talk about perspective of, what are your interactions where you are? If you go to the downtown parking garage and go have dinner at one of the restaurants there, and you walk over to the Maryland Theater and see a show, and you get in your car and go home, you had a great experience. You're not seeing the stuff, right? But if you're in the square, if you're in that back alley of the parking deck, a little squirrely, and if you're going to stop and get gas at, as you go out, you're looking at some other issues there. But this frustration bubbled over, right? This article talks about how Senator Corderman had some things to say, and I think he inflamed some things with kind of, progressive policies, and then the mayor came back with some shots, and then it bubbled over on the social media after that, But from the vantage point of what I saw, it just became a partisan fight.
Yeah, and
you didn't change any hearts and minds.
No.
If you were over here and if you're upset in regards to some of the laws and policies that are coming out of Annapolis, you're still upset. Yeah. If you're over here and you believe that the thing that we need is a 24-hour crisis and that's your number one priority, you're still there. And like there's nothing that bringing these two sides back together.
Well, and there are people that are in this for crisis creation, and I'm not saying Christian Wright is one of them. I know him personally. He and I were in a service club together for many years. I find him to be an articulate, intelligent, and not a, he's not going to overstate things in my view. That said, we all have opinions, we all have perceptions, and it is possible, even with the best of intentions, that we perceive things that may not be true. And I'm not, again, I think there is a problem with drugs in Hagerstown. I think there's a problem with drugs in many communities. I question the marketing efforts of the city sometimes, specifically when you talk about social media, the fact that they're now publishing, here's what the police did, and they're showing pictures of guns and pictures of this and pictures of that.
Exactly.
And that, okay, I get that at some level, and I see the people that support the city, I see them coming back saying, wow, great job, city police. And yes, it is a great job, city police. But on the other side, the people that don't comment on that article are the ones that are saying the city has a drug problem, and this is just reinforcing that opinion.
Right.
Yeah, and I say this too. Listing people who have been arrested for anything is no reason to celebrate. It's not an accomplishment. That is a problem. Yes, the police have a job. They have an unfortunate job, not a job worth celebrating them arresting individuals. Because I believe our police force want to be able to patrol safe streets and never have to arrest anybody. So the fact that you made it a celebration, I had a little discomfort with that. Yes, they did an unfortunate job. Yes, they're doing their job, but they're doing the job of a result of things not working as they should, right? So the police shouldn't have to be able to be at that position to be celebrated for arresting individuals with $80 in their pocket, $100. Those aren't the ones pumping drugs into the streets and this whole where you're not going to destroy our communities and things like that. We need to get our legislators together to sit down and talk about solutions. You talk about not changing minds. Absolutely didn't change minds. I believe it became more divisive. I don't believe people felt they had to take a side because no solutions were offered. And then the solution offer was listing the work that the police were doing. And again, nothing against the Hagerstown Police Department. They are doing a job and often a thankless job, but it's still a job that is pointing to things that need to change.
Yeah.
So that was one of my major issues with, I want to hear that we're going to sit down, and also people want to be heard and understood. If you have a business owner who is frustrated and who's crying out for support and help of his business and just the community that business serves, because that business also serves other businesses, let that person's emotions, let them be heard, let them be understood, let them know it's warranted that they feel that way. Sit down and have a conversation, but not start a divisive argument grounded on a constituent and a business owner's frustration with the problem at hand.
Yeah. Jim, I want to give you a different perspective on what you were saying in regards to Christian and his response. And one of the things he said in his email is that this disgusting behavior threatens the security of customers, employees, and quite frankly, makes me look forward to moving our business outside of city limits. The other perspective is he was using his voice. Because if you watch city council meetings, there are some residents that are pretty much at every meeting for open comment to talk about this problem over and over again. And you hear about meetings that are going on, right? But then nothing's happening, and the same people are back again. It's one gentleman, he's there just about every time, talking about the same issues over and over. I look at it from the perspective that Christian is speaking up for people that wouldn't really have a voice. Because many of his clients, they could go to a city council meeting and get 5 minutes. But he took his platform.
Right. They're not going to get published in the Herald Mail.
They're not going to get published in the Herald Mail. He took his platform and says, listen, I'm putting this out here, guys. We got to do something.
And that's a perfectly logical spin on it. And frankly, I think that probably was his motivation. Again, my question is his perception reality or others' perception reality? And I don't know the answer to that.
I think that if he's locking his doors to protect his clients and his staff, this is not a new business. This is not someone trying to get attention. If you have a customer base and you have 100-year-old customer coming to you saying that I have a major problem, when this is not their norm of how they communicate with you, then I think there needs to be a pause and not a defensiveness about what we're doing and this is great over here, but we have problems. That's an opportunity to really listen.
And this raised flags, but this is not a new conversation.
No, not
We've
at all.
seen it. We've seen it in print over the last couple of weeks and months, as you know. And I hate to kind of bring it back. It's been about Cannon, right? That's where all the attention it keeps coming to, you know. And it's labeling a street or a community based on this conversation. When, like you said, it's happening on other streets. And you said, I'm gonna take my business from downtown and to bring it outside the city limits. That goes what you said. Is there a major difference in what's happening at the county? And if it is, isn't that an issue? How do we address that? Right? Why are we pulling something out of city limits when going into county is less than a mile away? If that,
Well, it depends on where you go, and it depends on where the concentration of poverty and homeless are. And that's the kind of one of the underlying things that we aren't talking about. We can focus on drug use and rehab, but remember, the city of Hagerstown has a 27% poverty rate. And poverty is one of those underlying factors that I don't feel is being addressed in regards to, not in regards to servicing poverty. We have many organizations that service poverty, but there are not many organizations moving folks out of poverty.
Some would argue that the number of organizations that we have in our community serving poverty actually contributes to the problem.
and
People come from out of town because they know they will get services here. And there's many examples in that, and I've heard that from executive directors from more than one not-for-profit organization.
And I think, and that also kind of came, you know, in the discussion in the opening of this article as well, about this being a safe haven,
Right.
you know, and concentrating resources in one location during a crisis and a multiplex. And I don't believe that that's the answer, but I don't believe it's not something to be considered. And how we, like you said, how do you make a transition from that? There definitely needs to be basic needs and services to address these issues. But how do you go from point A to point B and not just concentrate all the resources and all the efforts in point A and just create a cycle that really is festering or creating the perception or mindset that everything is just downtown?
Well, and getting back to for a minute to the social media aspect of this, what I see being posted is point-in-time statistics. Last week, the Hagerstown City Police Department had 1,796 calls for service. That seems incredibly high to me. They had 40 arrests. They had 9 controlled dangerous substance issues that were not marijuana. They had felony robbery warrants. They had handgun warrants. They had discharging firearms in city limits. They had robbery. They had traffic stops. How does that compare to last month, or 6 months ago, or a year ago, or 3 years ago, or 5 years ago? Is the trend up, or is the trend down? And the problem for the city, in my view, in not publishing those statistics is that people like me that would like to see those can only assume that if they're not publishing them, they're not going the right way.
Right.
And that may or may not be true.
Right. But you don't know.
No, but here's the other question. And Grant, and you're right about the Cannon Avenue area. You've seen a lot of press on that. If you look at the downtown core, if you look at City Center today versus several years ago, are we better off or are we worse off? I mean, go back just before the 2008 recession and think about what we had there, and we were starting to get investment in the city. We had that very long-term recession. When the recession finally ended and we started recovering, we saw renewed investment. We saw big names like Don Bowman and others making major investments in the city center. We see the Maryland Theater, we see USMH, we see all of these very positive signs. In my mind, yes, we still have a lot of work to do, but I think our city core is healthier today than it was several years ago.
Economically, yes. buildings.
But
redesigned.
doesn't that if we continue to build that economic prosperity,
Right.
doesn't that eventually get rid of some of these issues? Because these drug people, from what I understand, they don't want to be in an area where they're going to be seen by 100 different people walk into the Maryland Theater or walk into a restaurant or walk into a new sports stadium. They don't want to be there. So they're at some level going to disperse. It's going to be less attractive for them to be downtown.
Being addicted to drug is a sickness. And I don't believe all that where I'm at, if people are going to see me, really comes into play most of the time. I don't think it's a lot about people with drug use robbing people or beating people up on the street. They're openly using drugs in the street. They're nodding off on curbs. You know, it becomes a detractor and an eyesore to people actually walking the streets. So no matter how much you build up the buildings and economics, if I don't feel comfortable walking, I'm not going to show up. And that's the perception that people are having. You're right. People on the streets deter crime. But again, are we looking at crime or are we looking at an eyesore that people don't want to see it? They don't want to see people using drugs. They don't want to see people panhandling, sitting on the streets. They don't want to see these things. So I don't think it's specifically driven to the crime. And you talked about those reports. I agree with you 100%. They lack education and details and substance around numbers. You know, you can use numbers to prove anything if you don't put the details. So even with the Hagerstown Police Department, service calls, over 1,000 service calls. Doesn't the police department also get called when EMS gets called as well?
Yeah.
Is that part of the service calls?
Just under 1,800 service calls.
Right.
And I understand the point there was to say, hey, we're doing work.
Right.
But
no one was ever doubting that the police department was doing work.
no, I don't think they are.
And
You know, most of the police officers that I met from the city of Hagerstown over time have been great people.
And I think that's what the problem was. I think there was an assumption or offense taken that this article was saying that the police are not doing their job, are not actively keeping people safe, and are allowing things to happen. And I think in reaction to that, you've seen kind of a social media campaign celebrating the police. I didn't take it as the police not doing their job.
I didn't either.
Right. I took it as a issue with the controls and policies and the governing and partnerships and the collaboration that needs to happen against everyone we've elected to support the police as well as constituents in our community. So, and again, I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. I'm just saying that it needs to be a conversation. It needs to be a sit down. We need to stop grabbing at ideas and throwing them out there and saying, here, how I fix it. It's not going to happen in silos. Unless everyone sits down and comes up with a solution and makes sure that the people of this city, downtown, and across the county are actually being heard, we're just going to continue to have banter back and forth, and everyone's going to make their assumptions.
Well, one of the things that I was just thinking about this past legislative session, was there anything about addressing this issue that was a focus
Not that I
that
remember.
we can recall?
Not that I remember. That's not to say there wasn't.
Right.
I can't recall anything.
And, you know, the city hired a lobbyist in the last month of session to go down to lobby for their needs. Mm-hmm. But that was for an indoor turf arena. That wasn't to address this issue. So we have a disconnect there. You know, I went back and looked at the survey that the city did that they were touting before, and that was the number one concern of citizens.
Was the drugs?
The drugs and the drug usage downtown. So it seems like there's a disconnect. And, you know, and it was two things we said last week when we were talking about the county commissioners and, you know, 2 new commissioners coming in, and hopefully there's going to be more collaboration between state and the city for them to work better together. And then Terrence also said at the end of the show, we'll always have a topic to speak about as long as we have social media.
Yeah.
And look where we are, right? and what we saw this week is this fracture between the delegation in an election year and our city council. And let's be honest, this fracture has been going on for over a year. I mean, this fracture began when Delegate Cham got appointed, right?
Yeah.
And it continued, with Councilman Alshire yelling at Senator Quarterman, telling him to sit down, and a lot of the things that was contentious around the stadium and that negotiation, and then the indoor turf arena. And it seems like all of that is snowballed to where we are today. And it's been reduced to kind of celebrating, the police over who they arrested this week. But none of that is leading to a long-term solution. All that is doing is making some folks feel good in the minute, in the moment, and being able to say, well, back the blue, or great job, or what, but it's still not the long-term solutions that are gonna move our community forward.
Slogans and sound bites. We need more than that. And even throwing each other under the bus, even in this article, like how many times have we talked about a loss of faith amongst our elected officials? Right? This is not helping the situation. And again, I'm not saying that anyone has any ill intent, and I'm sure that there's some frustration amongst them as well.
Well, there probably are people that are going to use this as a political.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say those people do have ill intent. I don't know that I would point to any of our elected officials and say they have ill intent. I think they're trying to do the best job they can.
But doing the best job you can doesn't mean taking offense. Sometimes you got to take a step back. This how it played out, and there was some truths that was stated both on social media and definitely in this article, but there's also some gray area in this conversation that I'm sure this was the first time a lot of the constituents had any idea a lot of this stuff was going on. I know I've read a couple of things. I'm like, I didn't know this group exists. I didn't know this was being worked on. Like it just came out of nowhere when there's so many opportunities where we should be educating the constituents of the city and the county as a whole, and not having them kind of throw all this stuff at them only because someone was triggered. I think there's a lot of good information, a lot of resources and ideas that the people should know. These individuals are elected to represent us, not make decisions in silos. We should be included and have an understanding of how they're working on issues that affect our safety and our well-being.
I couldn't agree more. However, there's a caveat there. Yes, we should be included. We should be allowed to have our voice, but there are many of us that choose to complain and not participate in a process that would help fix the situation. There are people out there, especially on social media, who all they want to do is go bang the drum about why the city of Hagerstown sucks.
Absolutely. But
and the problem is those people get a following, because there are people out there that may not be singing that song, but they're willing to jump on the train.
I agree wholeheartedly, but that doesn't mean shut down information from everybody.
No, I agree.
Right? So you have to work through that, and it's the 80-20 rule, right? There are going to be you can't manage to the 20, you got to manage to the 80, and there's 80% of us that really need this information and will support them, and hopefully drown out the 20. But if we're not informed either, all we can do is sit quiet as well.
So let's get informed. I'd like to take this opportunity to invite our mayor, our city police chief, and whomever else they would like to have come onto the show, either singly or in a group, and talk to us about what they're doing, talk to us about statistics, not just point in time, but over time, and give us a vision.
And I think that's a great idea, but again, it can't be a silo. There's no city if there's no county. There's no county if there's no state. Like, we really have to, everyone has to be at the table. Whoever's not at the table is left out. And if they're not being heard, understood, or contributing, all it is going to be a siloed conversation. No, let's bring them all to the table. Right? Let's get our representative from the city, our county, and our legislators that go down to Annapolis and support Bill, and have them sit around this table and have a conversation with us, and let us ask questions and be held accountable for working in a collaborative way and not picking at each other and pointing fingers. Let's look forward and not start pointing fingers at each other.
I haven't seen the pointing fingers between the county and the city. Maybe I just have missed it. But
not on this issue.
Not on this issue.
No.
You know, the thing for me, you know, we had the mayor on when she
Was elected.
When she was elected, and one of the questions that I asked that we didn't get an answer to is, what does success look like in this war? Like, what are the metrics? Like, what can the community follow other than your eyes? And your eyes are always dependent on your proximity. Like, where are you normally at? You know,
Well,
in my travels on a daily basis, I don't see it a great deal.
yeah. I think any political, I think any elected representative can tend to have 50% of the people that love them and 50% of the people that hate them. I don't think Mayor Keller is any different than that. I think that from my perspective, I would be hard pressed to find anyone who's more passionate about the issues of drugs and drug abuse than Mayor Keller. I mean, she's been personally impacted by it with, I don't know whether it was a friend or a family member or whatever, but clearly it's touched her life, and she is very passionate about it. I'd welcome that conversation. We may have to get a bigger table.
I'm all for it, but I also would say that a lot of lives have been touched or impacted by drugs.
Absolutely.
And just because you have a passion for it, don't mean that you have the best ideas
No.
to solve it. And passion is great
And
for coming to the table.
Yeah.
But-
Are we looking at what other communities are doing successfully to fight this? I don't know. Maybe we are. I can't say that.
Right.
But those are the kind of questions I would ask. What are the year-over-year statistics? What is the trend?
And not national statistics, our statistics.
Right.
Because
exactly.
our community is different than what the national.
But how do we compare to other, you know, in real estate you use the term comparables, other real estate that's similarly positioned. How do we compare to other communities?
Right, other comparables, but, you know, if you're on the Herald Mail page, you know, it's always the little Baltimore, and we're not Baltimore, right?
No, we're not.
I'm sorry. Comparable data is not going to change anything. You can drop it in much data and say, oh, we're not as bad as such. That's not going
Right.
to change anybody's mind.
I get
the people
that.
who live it every single day.
day.
But-
They need to see a plan for it. Like, even right now with addiction, we have Opioid Awareness Month is coming up in September, and Washington Goes Purple kicks off here soon to support that for the month of September. On the hindsight, again, of still people being frustrated. And awareness is one thing, but solutions is what people are asking for. What's the plan for it? And they don't hear solutions, they want to see the change. And if you can't show them change, they want to hear the solutions, right? So that's the only thing. Everyone knows there's an issue. And I'm glad we brought attention to it. I'm glad we're working on it. But now we need to hear, how are we going to put change in place and move the needle? And we have to look internally to our community first before we start looking how we compare to communities well outside. Because there's always some uniqueness to every single community and how they're built up and what their needs are. And sometimes I think we get too caught up in trying to be another community or replicate something else that worked in another community. Yes, we can learn from it, but we really have to have an understanding of what this community needs. And no one knows that more than the people who live, work, and play here every day.
So I would point out two areas of disagreement with some of the quotes here. First of all, with Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright suggests that the people that were in his parking lot or whatever doing drugs, that they weren't arrested. They were only given citations or whatever the case may be. And that's true. But, you know, our police operate under a set of standards. And if there's no legal ability for them to arrest these people, then that is, you know, it's not their fault that they can't arrest them, right?
Right.
Number two,
But he addressed that, though. Somewhere in the article, he basically said he felt that the police were, in essence, responding to these situations to the best they could, but he was concerned about the law.
yeah, okay. And then Mayor Keller at one point said that she thought the decision to copy the Herald Mail was inappropriate. I don't agree with that.
No,
I think that if you feel like you're not being heard, well, you escalate the issue. And as you said earlier, Reggie, he has a voice, and he is a
used
respected business in this community, has been for 100 years, and he used that voice.
But look at the result of his voice. I mean, put the dust up aside, right? You have the police department now listing off the arrest they had a few days later.
Right.
Right? Not saying that that's the right thing to do,
No.
but
it's
he got a reaction, right?
got a reaction.
That was more of a reaction than the older gentleman that's at every open block of city council to express these concerns that he see in the city. That was more of a reaction. So he used his voice, and his voice mattered.
Yeah.
And addiction is more than just opioids.
Yeah.
That's what the epidemic is right now. But you've seen in some of those arrests, there's still distribution of crack cocaine still on the street. And we seen what happened to what crack cocaine did to neighborhoods back in the 80s and 90s when everyone got locked up because they were in possession of it. There's still families and communities decimated because of the criminalization of addiction from the 80s and 90s. So I think that was an extreme. And even now, where it's just a health issue, is maybe too far in the other direction. How do we come to a happy medium? How do we address this, making sure that people feel safe, but at the same time, people are getting treatment and help? So I think that's where the conversation comes in at. That's when maybe some blanketed legislation could come in. But until you have those who agree with both ends of the spectrum come and find some kind of collaborative solution, it's just going to be who's right and who's wrong.
Well, it's going to be hard to get legislation when you don't have a united front going to Annapolis, right?
Yeah.
You have fractures, you have different priorities. You know, the city's going off on their own. They want to bring in their own lobbyists to do their own thing. It just doesn't speak well for this community.
And I'm going to say this as well, and being privy to some of the conversation through other issues that really went down to Annapolis to change things here in the community, there are a lot of meetings that occur between someone like Senator Quarterman and our Mayor Keller or the City Council, and there are a lot of meetings that the communities aren't privy to. And reading this, you would swear they never spoke before.
Right.
They
never run into each other.
They never run into each other. They've never been in the same room.
There's no late night phone calls to each other
Right.
on a multitude of things.
Right, absolutely. And I know that's the furthest thing from the truth.
Right.
I've sat in those rooms. I've been privy to those meetings, and these things do happen, and they are speaking. So I just say this so the constituents will have a little bit of comfort that this is a point in time incident, communication, or dust up. Those who are elected for our meeting, they are responsibly interacting with each other. Should they do it more? Absolutely. Should they be a little bit more collaborative in when they do it? 100%. But I just don't want this to be one of those things that becomes such a negative marketing that none of our elected officials know what they're doing and are doing anything to help us, and they're divided, and we have no hope.
I just think that, I chalk a lot of this up. It's an election year, right?
But it's not an election year for the city council.
It is in a sense.
I missed. How's that?
Because, again, the city, for the most part, is backing Brooke Grossman.
Okay.
They're looking for a voice in regards to the things that they're looking for. They're separating themselves more and more from the coalition because they see that their interests are different. So it is an election year issue, because if you looked at the polls,
Do you think Delegate Cham has been vocal enough on this issue?
I think it's not. If you're looking for her to be vocal on social media the way that they were, you're not going to see that out of her. But you will find her at a coffee house somewhere having conversations or talking to people. You won't see her being out there. So if you're looking for her there, you're not going to find that.
I think she did the right thing.
Yeah.
Step back from this. This was emotionally driven. This was something that
And it was building.
Right. Yeah, it was building, and I think her thing is to do your job. Your job is not to be on social media all the time, not to swing at every pitch that goes out there,
that's right.
but pick up the phone, call people, speak to individuals, mediate the situation, go speak to constituents, talk to business owners. And again, I think a lot of that stuff happens behind the scenes all the time. But again, social media sometimes makes for good entertainment. And I think for her to get engaged or jump into this, and it would have just been another person taking a side, and would have created even more divisiveness.
It would have created more divisiveness. It would have been.
And again, I don't think that was anybody's intent to divide the community, but unfortunately, or play politics of Republicans versus Democrats, partisan. None of that. I don't think was the intent, but that's immediate where it gravitated to.
Right. But Senator Quarterman did want to point out that some of the things that he would like to see in legislation could not get through in Annapolis. But it's going to take more consensus building and focus.
So you suggested, what I thought I heard you suggest is that Delegate Cham was appropriate in not jumping in because she's going to be a starting pistol. How about Senator Quarterman? He did jump in at some level, and I think in the article, Mayor Keller said that his comments were inappropriate, or I don't remember.
I can't say this with certainty, but it seems to me that he was trying to be the voice of some folks in the business community that are frustrated.
Completely out of line were how she referred to his comments.
I don't know about the out of line part, because you say out of line and then go to social media and then basically be just as out of line. So it was more so than an election year. It was kind of a partisan spat, right? It was a partisan spat that at this point has not gotten us anywhere.
Yep. And I think there was some items of contention that weren't made available to the public, that there was some contention there with Senator Quarterman's district and what the city was doing and their plans there. And I think this kind of was spilled out into this conversation. Yeah. So I think that's where his reaction came from, as well as the reaction from Mayor Keller's in this. And I think this spilled out of rooms and meetings that us as constituents weren't privy to.
Because I haven't heard much about this megaplex idea, not on this issue.
No.
But, Quarterman said that they were considering a megaplex, I guess, at the old county market? Is that where they were speaking of? And
somewhere out in the north end, because the concern was that it was too close to North High and it was across the street from a liquor store.
Well, yeah, that's the old county market there.
Mm-hmm. What liquor store is it? Alteris Liquors.
I believe that's the
what it's called. Yeah, okay.
There's like 2 liquor stores in the proximity.
Well, that's true. There's one in that
little
strip
there's one
center
down on Pennsylvania Avenue there.
Yeah, okay.
There, but this megaplex ideas does seem to be one that we're hearing out of the city, right? We're hearing about it in this instance in regards to a 24-hour crisis, and then we've also heard a megaplex idea when it comes to bundling social services together on Prospect Street.
Yeah.
I just think that these conversations need to be held in the light of day.
Agreed. More to come.
More to come. Stay with us. We'll have more after the break. Welcome back to the show. Gentlemen, we pinpointed a topic locally. Let's broaden out and talk about a national topic a little bit. And Jim, I know you love talking about the former president. So the article is nearly 40% of Americans say Trump or Biden's second term, worst thing that could happen.
I completely agree.
Take it away, Jim.
I completely agree. I couldn't agree more. I think regardless of what you think of President Biden's politics, I don't think he is ready for another 4-year term.
Is he ready for another 2 years?
I wonder about that. And while we haven't heard much from Kamala Harris, in my view, much of what we heard has not been even what the Democrats wanted to hear. So I think that's a problem. On the Trump thing, he just needs to go away, and I've said that here. And again, I was a supporter at one point, but he is just, I grew weary of it very quickly.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Now, as far as Vice President Harris, I said this a couple of years ago that I didn't think Biden was going to finish his term. I thought President Biden was going to transition his seat within his 4 years, and
it may happen.
I still believe so. I believe he's there right now to kind of take the blows of the transition of an administration, and then hand over the baton and give her the opportunity to possibly strengthen herself over the next 2 years to go into a election cycle, and that might be the case. It might not be, but I believe just publicly between the former president and current president, they've taken so many blows in the media, and they've had so many missteps, and we are in unprecedented times as we are right now. We're seeing things in the media play out with our former president that just is, if you told somebody this 10, 15 years ago, they'd be like, never, right? we would never, when you see some of these, and they're talking about the FBI and raids and all this other stuff. Like, all it is really making people feel extremely uncomfortable about our leadership. And even with President Biden and, seeing things about his mental capacity and his physical ability to lead and some of the missteps that are showing out in social media. Social media is not very friendly right now. No matter what happens or what changes or what policies are put out there right now. And I see them really trying to list all the things he's put in place and all the things that the president's kind of working on right now. And there's some great things coming out of there, but I think the damage is done.
Yeah.
And I think the American people don't want to see either one of them lead this country, in 2 years.
The article suggests that 85% of Democrats and 25% of Republicans are against the Trump bid, and 43% of Democrats and 84% of Republicans are against a Biden second term. Now that's interesting. So Trump lost 25% of his party. Biden lost 43% of his party. Now I suspect that 43% who didn't want Biden would also not go for President Donald Trump term 2. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was interesting that it was, that Trump, because I've said on this program many times that I thought his support was waning apparently far more than what it really is.
Listen, when you think about both of these men, elderly men.
Elderly men, yes.
Our country has just a lot of scar tissue from both of them, right?
They do.
I mean, Biden's been a career politician, and, Trump, from reality star to everything else to a tumultuous 4 years, there's just a lot of scar tissue. Like, it's time to turn. Like, our country is growing more diverse by the day. Mm-hmm. It's time to turn the page on that.
I just think, when I was thinking this, it's kind of like if you split Reagan in half. I know all the Republicans are going to hate me talking about Reagan, right? But imagine social media was around towards the end of Reagan's term, right? As we know that he was waning as well, has come out of there as well. So there was some, reports of that there wasn't as many eyes on the missteps that were in place,
Well, and there wasn't there wasn't the 24-hour media cycle either.
Exactly. And
so you could hide a lot more back then than you can today.
Absolutely.
We didn't know that Nancy was running the country.
As many believe, absolutely. And then he also was a star that became president, right? So he also brought his appeal from television and movies into the
But
presidency.
even being a star in the period of time he was different than Trump being
Exactly.
a reality star, right?
Yeah.
Because of the intensity of it. Like Ronald wasn't on your television every week,
Right.
No, he wasn't.
right?
He played in some movies.
He played in some
and-
movies,
yeah.
right? It was different.
I
But
was
you know-
I was interested to see the what I'll call the more left-wing media outlets were because of this latest bill that passed with the in the Congress and in the Senate that's going to his desk for signature.
I think it was signed today.
Was it signed today? So I was interested to see. They say, "Oh, this is the new birth of Joe Biden, and he is he's back on his game and he's got it going on and he's ready to lead." Yeah, I don't buy that.
Well, some folks in the media judge by if you get legislation passed, no matter what's in it, if you're successful or not. I just think the biggest thing that's happening right now is gas is below $4, right? So you're getting a little bit of relief at the pump.
A little bit, but you're still paying a lot more than you were a couple years ago.
Absolutely, but
Right.
you got a stock market rally going on. So you have some things that are kind of lightening things up around the edges. We don't know if they're going to last.
Let's say that I think we're underestimating some things, right? There's been a lot. It's just kind of been other things that overshadow it all, right?
Yeah, true,
we have the Inflation Reduction Act, we had the CHIPS Act, we have the PACT Act, we had bipartisan gun laws, we had the kill of Al Qaeda leader, we had the gas pricing, we had the job numbers that we're seeing right now, we had the lower unemployment, we have the confirmation of of Jackson into the Supreme Court as well that happened. We had leading support for Ukraine. We had expansion of NATO. We have American Rescue Plan, bipartisan infrastructure law, Senate negotiating update to Electoral Count Act. Like there's a lot of this stuff that just is being overshadowed. And again, they're making big of these things because a lot of this stuff used to happen behind closed doors and things like that. But we're still coming out of this big pandemic. And they're really trying to market him and push all this stuff out all of a sudden, but
Well, you know why.
right.
Because conventional wisdom is Democrats are going to get shellacked. They're going to lose the House, and they're fighting like heck.
Yeah.
To
and
to
they don't
have
have
some
to lose.
things
What do they have to lose? 5 seats, 6 seats
to lose the Senate?
to lose the House.
Oh, it's not much. I mean, the House is gone.
Yes.
I mean, it's 80% odds or better they're losing the House. But here's the funny thing about this. If the re-election match happened today, it's saying 41% of voters will be voting for Biden over Trump in this article, which is funny.
Right.
But
That's where I'd get out the old write-in. You want to talk about the you want to talk about being what's the old saying, between the devil and the deep blue sea?
well, the way Terrence was rattling off that list, it sounds like he's auditioning to be somebody's press secretary.
I know. I'm just saying. No. And honestly, I took a snapshot of this, like I was, and seen it, and I was looking at all these things. I was like, oh yeah, that's quite a bit. If you put it all together on one page, it looks like a lot. But a lot has gone on, and unfortunately, or fortunately, the American people is very hard to oppress.
Well, they are,
Right?
Yeah.
but they also have very short memories.
Very short.
Exactly.
And you were mentioning the 41% would back Biden. Well, 39% would back Trump.
Trump.
So that's within the margin of error.
Oh, absolutely.
Sounds like recount to me.
Oh, goodness. No.
Fake news.
No.
I'm sorry.
No,
Fake election.
I definitely don't want to go back to any of that. But
Actually, it says here the margin of error is 2.7 points.
yeah, it's just within the margin of error.
Yep.
Wow. I mean, hopefully we have some choices.
Absolutely. On both sides.
Who do we choose?
Well, I mean, so first of all, if Biden wants to run for a second term, if President Biden wants to run for a second term, isn't it almost unheard of to have a primary challenge
Challenger.
for a sitting president?
That's why he has to step down.
But do you think he will?
Yes.
2 years is a long, let's be honest, 2 years is a long time for both of them.
He's also the same man who didn't run when he would have. He thought he would have run. He would have won handedly after the passing of his son, right?
Yeah.
He has no problem stepping away from the seat, right? Because I believe he would have been president at that time.
I still just say at their age, 2 years is a long time.
Oh, I think you're right. So of course, and we're not going to get into it tonight, but that begs the question: then who? I mean, do we think the Democrats will put up Kamala Harris? I don't think so.
I think there's going to be a slate of folks that want to run.
I think so too. I think it's.
It'll be like the county commissioner race. You might have 15 of them.
Oh, I think so too. We'll see more debates where the debate stage they only pick the top 15 or 16 candidates.
But before we wrap up, I just want to give you this one last thing. I've been looking at the tea leaves in my Google machine. I wanted to talk about a local race. Trone Parrott. I had it 55 Parrott, 45
Right.
Trone. I'm down to 51-49. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's breaking news there.
Okay.
The race is tightening. It's within the margin of error now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good deal.
And I just want to make sure I
Trone's spending a
misspoke
lot of money.
in before, and I don't want to gloss over this, but it was Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, which was an amazing accomplishment. So I didn't want to slight, that accomplishment for our country and not give her her due and her full title. So
Yeah. There's too many women in your life that would have been upset.
that's right.
Wrap us up, Reggie.
All right. Well, that's all the time that we have for tonight. We hope that you'll like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and send us your comments to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That is feedback@theflipsidetv.com. But most importantly, we hope you join us again for another episode of